The baton struck Marcus Chen's ribs before he even saw it coming, a brutal, efficient crack that folded him against the hood of his Toyota, his keys scattering across oil-stained asphalt, while Officer Derek Rawlings leaned in close enough that Marcus could smell the coffee on his breath. "I said, don't fucking move, boy," Rawlings hissed, and the slur landed like a second blow, twisting something ancient and familiar in Marcus's gut, even as his phone clattered from his pocket, the screen lighting up with a single name: Jessica. The parking lot of Cedar Grove Apartments stretched empty around them at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. No witnesses except the broken security camera Marcus had complained about 3 times. And when he tried to speak, to explain he lived here, that his assigned spot was B7, that the white Lexus blocking his space had been there for hours, Rawlings' partner, a younger cop with a buzz cut and dead eyes, kicked Marcus's legs apart and started searching him with hands that lingered, violated, communicated something darker than procedure. "We got a call about a suspicious vehicle," Rawlings said, his knee grinding between Marcus's shoulder blades, and Marcus felt his cheeks scrape against cold metal while his mind raced through the calculation every person of color learns young: comply but not too much, speak but not too loud, exist but make yourself small, invisible, unthreatening. His hands were already raised when they'd approached. He'd said, "Good evening, officers," in his best code-switching voice, the one he'd perfected at Yale Law, the one that made white people comfortable. It hadn't mattered. The younger cop, his badge read Morrison, found Marcus's wallet, pulled out his driver's license, and something shifted in his expression, something that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water. "Well, well," Morrison said, turning the license so Rawlings could see. "Marcus Chen. You're that lawyer, aren't you? The one who testified against Patterson last month." Patterson. Officer James Patterson, convicted 3 weeks ago of excessive force, currently awaiting sentencing, and Marcus had been the expert witness who'd explained to the jury exactly how Patterson had violated every use of force protocol when he'd beaten a 16-year-old during a traffic stop. The pressure on Marcus's spine increased until his vision blurred. "Small fucking world," Rawlings said, and Marcus heard his phone buzzing on the ground, Jessica calling back, his sister, who was currently at a charity gala downtown, whose face was probably on the news cameras at this exact moment, District Attorney Jessica Chen, youngest DA in the state's history, the prosecutor who'd built her reputation on police accountability and had a conviction rate that made the union file complaints. She didn't know her brother was being ground into the pavement of his own apartment complex. She didn't know Marcus had spent the past 6 months quietly documenting a pattern, 17 cases of misconduct, all involving officers from Precinct 47, all buried under administrative review, all connected to Captain Howard Vance, who Marcus had been planning to expose in a report he'd nearly finished. The report was on his laptop, in his apartment, 200 feet away. "Check his vehicle," Rawlings ordered, and Morrison moved toward Marcus's Toyota with a crowbar that appeared from nowhere, and Marcus knew, with absolute crystalline certainty, that they were going to plant something. "You can't search my car without probable cause," Marcus said, his voice steady, despite the pain radiating through his torso, despite the taste of copper in his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue. Rawlings laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Probable cause. I smell marijuana. That's probable cause, counselor." There was no marijuana. Marcus didn't smoke, didn't drink, kept his life clean because he learned at 16 that existing while Asian in this neighborhood meant living under a microscope. And now Morrison was jimmying open his trunk while Rawlings kept him pinned, and Marcus saw the brick of white powder Morrison pulled from his jacket. The officer's movements were practiced, casual, the gesture of someone who'd done this before. Marcus's chest constricted. This wasn't random harassment. This was orchestration. "Don't do this," Marcus whispered, and he hated the pleading in his voice, hated that they'd reduced him to begging, but that brick in Morrison's hand was 10 minimum, a life destroyed, a career obliterated. His phone buzzed again, Jessica, persistent as always, and Rawlings ground his boot heel into Marcus's wrist until cried out. "Shut the fuck up," Rawlings said, and then into his radio. "Dispatch, we have a suspect resisting arrest at Cedar Grove Apartments. Request backup for drug trafficking and assault on an officer." The lies flowed smooth as water, each word a nail in Marcus's coffin. And Marcus realized this wasn't about Patterson, this was about the report. Someone had told them about his research, about the 17 cases, about the pattern that led straight to Vance. Morrison was reaching into the trunk when the Lexus's door opened. Marcus hadn't seen anyone inside, had thought the car was empty, but now a woman emerged, mid-30s, black, wearing hospital scrubs, and carrying a phone that was clearly recording. "I've been filming since you pulled him out of his car," she said, her voice carrying across the parking lot with the authority of someone who dealt with cops before. "I'm a nurse at County General. My name is Diane Harper. I'm streaming this live to my church group. 200 people are watching right now." The air changed. Rawlings's grip loosened fractionally, and Morrison's hand froze halfway to the trunk, the brick of drugs suddenly very visible in his other palm, caught in the glow of her phone's light. "Ma'am, you need to step back," Rawlings said, but his voice had lost its edge, replaced by something calculating, and Marcus saw Morrison pocket the drugs with a smooth motion, saw him step away from the trunk like he'd just been checking the license plate. "This is an active police investigation." Diane didn't move. "This is a parking dispute that you've turned into an assault. I watched the whole thing. He was getting out of his car when you attacked him. He never resisted. And that powder your partner just put in his pocket, everyone saw that too." Her voice was iron wrapped in velvet, and Marcus felt the shift in power dynamics, felt Rawlings deciding whether they could make two victims disappear, saw Morrison's hand drift toward his service weapon. The phone in Marcus's pocket buzzed a third time, and then a fourth, and suddenly Rawlings's radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised, District Attorney Chen is en route to Cedar Grove Apartments, requesting immediate supervisor presence. Over." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Morrison's face went white. Rawlings's knee lifted from Marcus's back. "D.A. Chen?" Morrison said, his voice cracking on the second word, and Rawlings was already calculating, already spinning the story, but too late. Marcus heard tires screaming into the parking lot, saw flashing lights that weren't red and blue, but the high beams of a black Lexus sedan, and Jessica was out of the car before it stopped moving, her gala dress incongruous with the fury in her eyes. "Get your hands off my brother," she said, and her voice could have cut steel, could have drawn blood. And Marcus saw his sister transformed into something he'd never quite witnessed, not the polished prosecutor from TV, but something raw, more dangerous. Behind her, 2 more cars pulled up, Captain Vance looking confused, and then a news van, because of course Jessica had brought the media, had weaponized her visibility. Rawlings's hand dropped from Marcus like he'd been burned. "Ma'am, we were responding to a call," he started, but Jessica was already moving, was already filming with her own phone, was already narrating for the camera. "Officers Rawlings and Morrison of Precinct 47 attacking my brother in his own parking space without provocation, caught on video attempting to plant drugs, witnessed by multiple parties." Diane was still filming. The nurse's footage would show everything, the initial assault, the search, Morrison pulling the brick from his jacket. Marcus pushed himself to his knees, his ribs screaming, and saw Vance's expression change from confusion to something else, fear. The captain knew. Of course he knew. The whole department must have known about Marcus's report, but they'd miscalculated. They'd thought he was alone, vulnerable, someone they could silence with a felony charge and a ruined reputation. They hadn't counted on Jessica's instincts, on the way she'd called him back 3 times, had tracked his phone when he didn't answer, had mobilized before they could finish their frame job. "Captain Vance," Jessica said, her voice formal now, prosecutor sharp, I'm placing Officers Rawlings and Morrison under arrest for assault, false imprisonment, attempted evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. You can surrender their service weapons now, or I can call in the state police. Your choice." The parking lot had become a stage, floodlit by news cameras, by phone screens, by the harsh fluorescent glow of a story that was already spreading through social media like wildfire. Hashtag DA's brother assaulted. Hashtag Precinct 47 corruption. Hashtag Justice Chen. Marcus saw it happening in real time. Morrison's face on Twitter, Rawlings' badge number trending, Diane's live stream climbing past 10,000 views. Vance's jaw worked silently. He was calculating odds, weighing options, understanding that every second of hesitation would be interpreted as complicity, but also knowing that this arrest would crack open everything, would lead to depositions, internal investigations, federal oversight. "There's been a misunderstanding," Vance said finally, and the cowardice in his voice made Marcus's stomach turn. "Officers, holster your weapons and step away from Mr. Chen." Rawlings looked like he wanted to argue, but Morrison was already moving, was already unbuckling his duty belt with shaking hands, and Marcus saw the future unspooling. The officers wouldn't just lose their jobs, they'd face criminal charges, real time. And the investigation wouldn't stop with them. It would follow the evidence up the chain, to Vance, to the union president who'd signed off on Patterson's defense, to every cop who'd participated in the systematic silencing of accountability. Jessica knelt beside Marcus, her hand on his shoulder gentle despite the rage still burning in her eyes. "Can you stand?" she asked, and he nodded, let her help him up while cameras clicked and flashed. His ribs felt cracked, his wrist was swelling, but he was alive, was free, was documented and witnessed and protected by the very visibility that usually made people like him targets. "I finished the report this morning," he whispered to her, and Jessica's expression hardened into something predatory. "Good," she said, "because tomorrow we're going to burn this whole department down." The news anchor was already broadcasting. "Breaking news tonight from Cedar Grove Apartments, where District Attorney Jessica Chen's brother was allegedly assaulted by police officers in what sources are calling a targeted attack related to his upcoming testimony in the Patterson case." Marcus watched his story become public property, watched the narrative solidify before Vance could spin it, before the police union could issue their standard statement about ongoing investigations and officers' rights. Diane approached, her phone finally lowered, and Marcus saw tears in her eyes. "I almost didn't record," she admitted. "I was scared, but my son, he's 16, and I thought, what if it was him?" Marcus took her hand, felt the tremor in her fingers, understood that her courage had cost her something, that pressing record had been its own act of resistance. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being, because without her, he'd be in handcuffs now, his life destroyed by men who believed their badges made them untouchable. 3 months later, Marcus stood in federal district court as the judge sentenced Rawlings and Morrison to 8 years each, not just for the assault, but for 17 other cases that Marcus's report had documented, a pattern of abuse that had finally metastasized into federal RICO charges against half of Precinct 47's command structure. Vance was already serving 15 years, had tried to make a deal, but Jessica had refused, had pursued maximum sentences with the methodical precision that had made her famous. Patterson's conviction had been the spark, but Marcus's assault had been the accelerant, the moment when the system's violence had become too visible to ignore. The department had been restructured, the union leadership replaced, and a civilian oversight board was now reviewing every use of force incident in real time. Jessica sat in the gallery, watching her brother testify about institutional rot, about the mechanisms of power that turned public servants into oppressors. When the judge asked Marcus if he had anything to add before sentencing, Marcus looked directly at Rawlings, at the man who'd ground his face into the pavement, who tried to destroy him for the crime of speaking truth, and said, "I forgive you, but forgiveness isn't the same as mercy, and mercy isn't the same as justice. You earned every year of this sentence." The courtroom was silent. Rawlings stared at the floor. Morrison wept quietly. Outside, reporters mobbed them, shouting questions about reform, about accountability, about whether this marked a turning point. Jessica fielded them with practiced ease, while Marcus stood beside her, his ribs still aching sometimes when the weather changed. But he was alive, was free, was documented and witnessed and protected by the very visibility that usually made people like him targets. "I finished the report this morning," he whispered to her, and Jessica's expression hardened into something predatory. "Good," she said, "because tomorrow we're going to burn this whole department down." "Do you feel safe now?" a reporter asked Marcus, thrusting a microphone toward him. And he considered the question carefully, thought about all the ways that safety was a luxury, a privilege, something that people like him had to fight for daily. "I feel heard," he said finally, "and that's a start." The sun was setting over the courthouse steps, painting everything gold and amber, and Marcus thought about parking spaces, about the arbitrary rules that governed who belonged where, who had the right to exist without justification, who could call the police without fear of becoming the suspect. He thought about power, about the thin blue line between protection and predation, about the cost of speaking up when silence was safer. But mostly, he thought about Jessica's phone buzzing in his pocket, about her refusing to stop calling, about Diane pressing record even though she was scared, about all the small acts of courage that saved his life. "Where do we go from here?" Jessica asked him as they walked to her car, and Marcus smiled despite everything, despite the system that was still broken even after 17 convictions, despite knowing that they'd won a battle but not the war. "We keep going," he said. "We keep documenting. We keep testifying. We keep showing up." Because that was the only way forward, not through one dramatic victory, but through the accumulated weight of 10,000 small refusals to be silent, to be complicit, to accept that this was just how things were. They drove away from the courthouse as the streetlights flickered on, Marcus's hand resting against his still healing ribs, Jessica's eyes on the road ahead. The city looked different now, not safer exactly, but more honest, its violence finally visible, documented, undeniable. And in that visibility, in that refusal to look away, Marcus found something that felt almost like hope. Not justice, not yet, maybe not ever fully, but movement, progress, change. The long, slow work of bending that arc, one case at a time, one testimony at a time, one moment of courage at a time. And tomorrow, he had another report to write.